Vanakkam. Greetings. My pen name is Seval Seer. I have recently published a book titled Om VEL Way. Be happy and make happy. I have started using YouTube as a way of giving an overview of my book, and this is episode 2. It focuses on a topic called Sink or Swim Across the Sea of Life. The waves being various needs and the experience we come across in fulfilling those needs. We looked at hierarchy of needs from Abraham Maslow and the sheets of experience from Upanishads as a way to describe this. But today we're going to talk about what holds us back or what makes us sink in this journey versus what propels it forward, or how do we swim across this journey. So let's look at these a little bit more. First set of slides will be about recapping what was covered in session 1. To start with, I have published a book called Om VEL Way, Be Happy and Make Happy in November 2023. This has already received some positive recognition and reviews. Publishers Newswire selected this book as one of the 8 books to bookmark. 2 other organizations, Reader's View and Reader's Favorite, have given this book 5-star ratings and a very positive feedback. To recap the underlying theme of the book and the title of the book. The underlying theme of this book is to be happy and make happy. It is founded on a proposition that everything we do is to increase quality and scale of happiness. By quality, I refer to the richness and intensity of happiness. By scale, I mean the scope, which is situations or number of people across which the happiness is shared, and longevity, obviously, how long it lasts. To evolve, to increase happiness in our lives and that of the others is the most foundational and ultimate theme of human life. So that's the proposition. We then discussed 3 types of happiness. First one is ease. Ease is an experience based on how aligned our needs with respect to external world and our ability to meet those needs. Second one is peace. Here, how do we go about achieving ease? So the correlation between our expressions, which are words, thoughts and deeds, and how well they align with our inner standards or measures, may that be ethical or moral standards. The third type of happiness is a synthesis of both in a unified way, but based on a higher order of truth. It is based on how well we are progressing against a notion of our true or ultimate self. That is, the extent of self-actualization, and how meaningful our life is in the context of who we are. So this is the recap of the underlying theme. Now let's look at the first 2 words of the title. The title is Om VEL Way. It is a spiritual seal in the sense it is an outlook or a way of life as to how we can effectively be happy and make others happy. Om is the spirit, VEL is the sport of life, Way is how the spirit plays the sport. If we unpack a bit more, Om refers to who we are intrinsically and ultimately. We are not our possessions, or what we relate to, or what we are recognized by others, or anything in terms of body mind experience. We are an evolving awareness, that which is aware of body mind experience and evolve with it. Then, VEL refers to the actualization tendency or a drive towards self actualization. So it's an acronym of three words: verity, power or tendency to be aware of our true self. Second, evolution. It is the power or tendency to live according to our awareness. The final power or tendency is love. It is that which fuels us to progress along our evolution. It is both, gives the motivation and inspiration to be aware as well as to evolve. So that's the recap of title and its underlying theme. We then compared life to a journey across the sea of needs and experience. I introduced a framework of hierarchy of needs and sheets of experience to describe this further. Hierarchy of needs were outlined by Abraham Maslow, who is an eminent psychologist. He categorized human needs to be into five segments: physical needs, the basic needs, then safety needs, then he had emotional or love or belonging needs. The next one is esteem or to be recognized or a legacy needs, more of an intellectual needs. And the final one, he called it as self actualization, to be the self one truly is. The first four is called deficiency needs, meaning the more you have, the less motivation to go and acquire them. So, as you fulfill the lower needs, you can become aware of the high needs and you pursue the high needs. But the lower needs are more potent and urgent, so they demand and occupy your mind until those are fulfilled. The last need, he called it the growth needs, where the more you have it, more motivated you are to fulfill it. Now there's a corresponding definition of experience. It is an ancient wisdom from Upanishads, which is one of the important scriptures in Hinduism. So that goes to a similar sheets of experience. The first being physical, second being physiological experience, third being emotional, fourth being wisdom. The fifth one is defined as the bliss, the experience of bliss. Now, the focus of the rest of the session is underpinned with 3 points. So long as we are exclusively occupied with deficiency needs, we can only experience ease and peace, more of a transactional experience or a pain relief. We cannot just escape reality and go into a fantasy land and say we are going to self actualize. The way out is the way through. We need to work with where we are and evolve. The final point is blissful life is only possible when we progress along self actualization. So the sink or the swim across the sea of life depends on, are you exclusively focused on deficiency needs, which I'm going to call as self preservation, or are you focusing on growth needs, which is part of self actualization? Let's unpack one of the statements I made. So long as we are exclusively occupied with deficiency needs, we can only experience ease and peace in life. Because deficiency needs are about fulfilling our needs in relation to something external and meeting guidelines as to what we hold as standards. If we are exclusively focused on that, there is no time or effort made in discovering who we are and reorganizing our life based on that context. So, the first deficiency needs can give you ease and peace, a pain relief, or a distracting pleasure to lose ourselves. But it doesn't give you an awareness of who you are and evolve your life around who you are so that it is more meaningful. But as I mentioned before, we cannot escape reality of who we are. We need to work through that. Yes, the path of self preservation or augmentation, which is really focusing on the first four needs, the deficiency needs, does not lead to bliss. In fact, it ends up in suffering because we are ignoring the most foundational and ultimate need of human beings, self actualization. And when we exclusively focus on the deficiency need, we take a position of I am this, I am a fixed product, defined in terms of body, mind, their faculties, their experience and acquisition. And we tend to preserve or augment this. Kurt Goldstein, who is an eminent neurologist and a psychologist, calls this a response of a sick or a pathological organism when it is threatened or when the environmental demands are overwhelming. An organism settles for self-preservation. It doesn't go into self-actualization, which is its natural flow of life. A Danish spiritualist or an existential philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, published a great book called Sickness Unto Death. He says what we call as worldliness simply consists of people who have pawned themselves to the world. They use their ability to succeed and do very well, but they are not themselves. And he goes on to say, in a spiritual sense, they have no self because they are defined by the environmental environmental demands and some internal standards. They have not discovered who they are and evolve their life around that. What then hold us back? I'm going to look at some ancient wisdom from Buddhism and Hinduism. In Buddhism, there is a concept called dependent arising. In short, what it means is your life is what it is because you are who you are. In an elaborated sense, there are 12 links, one leading to another. I'm just going to highlight some of them. The first is ignorance of our true nature. That leads to, like a domino effect, leads to series of things, and then it distorts the experience that we face in life. Then, we thirst for that, and then we cling to that, and then it distorts our process of becoming. And then the next arising also get distorted and finally lead to suffering. I've gone into detail of some of these in my book, but for the purpose of this session, I'm just giving a highlight. According to Hindu thinking, particularly Saiva Siddhantam, which is the southern flavor of Hinduism in India, Ignorance is also recognized as the root cause of our suffering that lead to a fettered being, us becoming a fettered being. It talks about three types of major fetters. First is clinging to the dualities of our deeds and outcomes as an ultimate and independent reality. Duality means good or bad. Deeds are good or bad, or outcomes are good or bad, depending on who we are. They don't have an ultimate or independent reality. If we now cling to a particular fixed notion of what is good and bad and define us who we are, it impedes us to discover higher truth because it's going to distort our experience. The second fetter is taking the whole body mind experience as an independent and ultimate reality. Everything we see, everything we experience, and the dualities that goes with that. Here again, it is a fetter because body mind experience depends on who we are. What is good for one doesn't necessarily mean good for another. So what we are up to that point has a certain experience. If we cling to them as defining who we are, it impedes us discovering a higher truth of who we are in the next moment. The final fetter is called the atomization or finitization of self, based on 1 and 2. This is the final nail on the coffin. Self by nature is boundless because it's an evolving process of awareness. It is a spirit. Based on 1 and 2, the final fetter is to actually define us as I am this, and as a fixed product. Then it perceives, process, and define its next response in a distorted way. Doesn't allow for discovery of self, doesn't allow for evolution of self, therefore doesn't allow organizing your life in a more meaningful fashion. This is why these three are fetters, and the root cause of this is ignorance of who we are. As I mentioned before, all of these are well and good, but we have to work with ourselves, who we are. We can't jump out of our own skin. There is no fantasy land to escape. Even if we do that, it's just a detour. The reality will strike back. The only way through this is to explore, discover new truth, apply and practice, experience them fully, reflect on them, and evolve. You have to work through the deficiency needs. You can't be hungry and be in denial. You can't have an emotional need and be in denial. You can't have an aspiration to be recognized and then be in denial. That becomes even worse, a distorted human being who is a hypocrite. You have to really take it as it is without clinging that. Just be open, experience, and see the truth of those so that you can evolve to the next need. So the way out is actually way through. And Carl Rogers, one of the famous psychologists, published a book called Fully Functioning Person. And he identifies 3 threads that needs to be there in a self-actualization. 1, to be open to each occasion. Don't look at it as a preconceived and a distorted way, but to be open. Second one is to be existential, fully existential. Be who you are. Engage each event holistically. Finally, learn to trust a holistic judgment as an organism. not a faculty based decision, meaning, oh, intellectually I think this way, or emotionally, I want to go with that, or sensually I prefer that, but make a decision as a whole organism. Now, again, Soren Kierkegaard actually fabulously described this in his book Sickness Unto Death and Death. He says self is a synthesis. It is a synthesis of what is immediate and what is eternal, what is finite and what is infinite, what is a necessity and what is a possibility. If you just stuck to the lower end of the spectrum, then you are only addressing the deficiency needs, an immediate situation, or a finite, that's something that is concrete and you can hold on to, and only the necessities. Now, if you ignore these and just look at what is eternal and infinite and what is a possibility, that is like running into a fantasy land. There is no checks and balance. In his view, it is the synthesis that helps the self to evolve. Now, let's look at one of the most important concepts of Hinduism. It's actually compressed and condensed as a 5-letter mantra. It's called Sivaya Nama. It is also called Panchacharam, or the 5-letter mantra. It actually describes the self-actualization or falling into self-preservation in terms of interplay of 5 dimensions or aspects. One is a fettered self that clings to a notion of I am this, based on the 3 fetters we described before. Second is a notion of ultimate self, who we truly are, and also in an ultimate sense, who we aspire to be. Not in terms of the worldly things, but in terms of who we are, what is most meaningful to us. Then the third element is the evolving self, which has the potential to go from a fettered self towards the ultimate self. Then there are 2 kinds of interplay. One is called the concealing grace. It's another way of saying ignorance. It is recognizing the fact that at any point in time we won't have perfect knowledge, and we also may need some protective knowledge. If we find some situation as overwhelming, we form, however limited it might be, a view of the world that we find it at peace. Then the next one is called the revealing grace. When we reflect upon what has happened, when we are in a quieter state of poise, something comes as a higher truth, as an intuitive wisdom, a revelation. So the self-actualization is, or sticking to self-preservation in Hinduism, is defined as an interplay of these. So the first one is given a name Ma, second one is Si, and the third one is Ya, and the fourth one is Na, and the fifth one here is Va. It's just easy to remember as Sivaya Nama. Based on the 5 elements of self-actualization, there are 4-fold path to pursue towards self-actualization. They are really different sequence of those 5 aspects. First is called the way of service. For those who are outgoing, who are comfortable with concrete things in life, they are more excited about physical and physiological engagement. The option for there is to use that as a stepping stone to fully experience, reflect, and then evolve. So use the physical engagement or physiological engagement or engagement with the world as a stepping stone towards self-actualization. So in short, it's called Namasivaya, meaning you start with the way of the world. Then you say, okay, I am who I am, fettered or not. Accept that. Engage. Then reflect on the experience and discover a notion of, is that who you are or is it more? A little bit more of your ultimate self. That knowledge or awareness alone is a revelation, can trigger your evolution. So that is what that sequence is. So you start with outside and then bring it inside as a way of evolution. Way of worship is the second one. You actually polish your inside, your psychological elements, emotional and intellectual, based on a notion of what is your highest self. Then put that self, so engage the next moment with that higher awareness. So that's more of an inside out process. The third one is not outside or inside. You zero yourself as a witness and watch both the inner world and the outer world as an observer. This is really what you do in meditation. Anyone who is trained in meditation, what you do is you silence, bring yourself to a non-judgmental position. Early stages they ask you to watch your breath, but that's just to get you going. What you observe is you can observe the senses, the emotions, and the thoughts arising, evolving, and dissolving before you. By just observing those, you have a flash of intuition of a nature, a higher nature. Then you pursue. Last one is the way of unity. I actually call that as a meditation in action. In fact, the reason it's called the fourfold path is they all move towards the final one, which is every moment, here and now, internal or external or witnessing, is seen as an opportunity for an individual self to express its definition of its ultimate nature. So it is a unification or a synthesis of the other three. Now, it's not about where you start in the sense of which one is a superior one. It is more of where you are. Your natural tendency, based on those, you pick a method. Now, some might take a single method and stick with that throughout their life because it can lead to self-actualization. Some may evolve from the first to the second to the third and the fourth. It's not what is better or worse. It's more of what is most suitable to you. Each road, can take to self-actualization. This is obviously a quick overview. I have described this in more detail with various elements and some techniques, as well as illustrated with various stories. So, way of worship, for instance, Jesus Christ's life is a very good illustration of way of worship. Way of witnessing is Buddha's life, is an extremely good example to illustrate. Way of unity is Lord Krishna's life. But anyway, these are ways of illustration. It's not meant to be an ultimate definition, but it's based on my understanding and is expressed with the view to just illustrate. So these are described a bit more detail in my book. So anyone interested can look at it in detail there. Now let's spend time on my final assertion that a blissful life is only possible when we progress along self-actualization. I want to again look back on multiple perspectives. I think we have discussed a bit more about Carl Rogers and fully functioning person. He claims that individuals here are more content to be a process, an evolving process, than a fixed product. They experience their feelings and their thoughts in the fullest extent and engage the world in their fullest extent. This in turn gives two things. One, they discover themselves in the experience itself rather than force fit an experience into a predefined definition of who you are. And in his view, it provides the maximum satisfaction of their deepest need, which is self actualization. Soren Kierkegaard is actually in his Sickness Unto Death, is actually really defines it this way. He says the eternal and the ultimate nature drives selves to evolve and not to be held back by a rigid definition of self. He said that's why he says sickness unto death. It is a sickness of the soul until you realize your ultimate potential. And that drives us towards evolution. He goes on to say, to be the self one truly is, with your ultimate, or he calls it God, ultimate as a goal and standard. And until you achieve that, this sickness continues of the soul, or until you progress. He goes on to say that the possibility of this sickness is man's advantage over the beast. Obviously, him being Christian, he says the awareness of this sickness is the Christian's advantage over a natural man. In other words, the person with this awareness has an advantage over a person who is only focused on deficiency needs. And then he goes on to say, to be cured of this sickness is Christian blessedness, which is progressing towards self-actualization, is the divine blessings. Because you are discovering who you are, and your life becomes more and more meaningful around that discovery. In Upanishads, which is a Hindu way, it's actually, we looked at the sheets of experience or koshas before. It says, as we evolve our experience from, the physical towards the bliss, he says, it says, one who is aware of the bliss, of the ultimate, does not fear the other things. It is, as you experience bliss, your anchor points have shifted from what is demanded of the world, from the world, and all your internal standards, ethical or moral. It's actually shift from there based on a sense of who you are. That becomes your higher and final anchor point. The philosopher Nietzsche actually described this transformation beautifully. He calls in the first stage, people operate as camels or the beast of burden. They take the worldly demands, or they are driven by internal standards, a guilt. And like the camel, it takes more and more and more weight. Finally, it's had enough. So the camel, the beast of burden, transforms into a lion. It defies everything. And he calls this the sacred no. It rebels against every odds, whether it's a worldly odds or an internal demands, saying, thou shalt. So it is a rebellion against everything that says, thou shalt do that. The third stage is called the child stage, or the sacred yes stage. Here, the person operates with renewed openness as a self-propelled wheel. It is driven from a sense of who you are, not driven externally from what the world wants or internally based on your ethical or moral standards. It actually naturally moves and evolves with who you are. It is called sacred yes because you're not fighting or defending against what is happening to you, but you take it. You take the freedom how you perceive, process, and respond. Stephen Covey, really like his book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He defines proactivity as the first habit, and he defines responsible as response able, meaning you create the space between what happens to you and how you respond. That space is the space of freedom. It is the space of evolution, and that is the third stage. You let and you are open to what happens to you. You engage fully in the way you naturally are. You discover higher truth in the process, and then you go beyond the event and meet the next event as a more evolved person. So it's strange that the sacred yes is synonymous to Om. In Tamil, which is one of the oldest and a living language in India, Om means yes. It is also similar to Amen. So they all come towards, there's an acceptance of what happens to you, but taking responsibility how you perceive it, how you process it, how you respond to it, how you reflect it, and how you go beyond it. So that is the path of self-actualization. What's next? So this concludes our session 2. But as I said before, my interest wasn't an academic endeavor. It is not about reading various religions, psychology, philosophy, and presenting a unified theory. My thirst was to practice them. To practice this, otherwise, this is just a knowledge. To practice some of these, you need a different form of tools and techniques. Otherwise, it just remains in the back of your mind as knowledge. It's just a burden. I mean, we have so many things in our lives. Last thing you want is keep another burden just in the back of your mind. Unless you can digest this and practice this and learn from that, it's not really useful. So these are called what I call as invocable representation. So in the next session, let's take a psychological perspective of the need for those, and I'm going to introduce few aids. One in the form of visualization, where how do you represent some of the things we discussed in a visual sense. Second is mantras or condensed form that you can invoke at will, at the point of engagement. Why they are important and what those are will be the focus of the next session. Hope you enjoyed this session and hope it's actually adding some value to some of you. Looking forward to our next session.